It wasn't some impulsive decision made in the heat of anger. No, I'd been contemplating this moment for months, ever since I'd heard through a distant cousin's indiscreet Instagram story that my sister had been spinning elaborate tales of my supposed downfall. Each rumor more pathetic than the last. Each whisper designed to elevate her own mediocre achievements by comparison. The decision to attend the reunion crystallized one rain-soaked Tuesday in my Berlin studio. I was putting the finishing touches on a commission that would pay more than my parents' combined annual income when my phone lit up with a notification. Another relative, another post, another mention of such a shame about him, so talented, now living rough. Something cold and final settled in my chest that day. Not rage, but resolution. I made the arrangements methodically. The suit fitting in Milan. The car rental in New York, specifically requesting the Phantom in obsidian black because symbolism matters. I even timed my flight to land just hours before the reunion would hit its peak, when glasses would be half empty and inhibitions lowered just enough for my entrance to have maximum impact. The house I left behind was not a home, but a stage where every role was assigned before birth. The architecture itself seemed to enforce the hierarchy, my father's study with its heavy oak door always slightly ajar, a reminder that he was accessible but only on his terms. The formal living room where we entertained guests but never actually lived. The kitchen where my mother prepared meals with silent efficiency, her creativity confined to seasonal table settings and holiday decorations. My part was clear from the moment I showed artistic inclination at age 5. The quiet, grateful brother, the one who listened instead of spoke, nodded instead of dared, painted quietly in the attic while my older sister strutted through life like she was the heir to some invisible throne. The attic became my refuge and my prison, the only space where I was allowed to exist fully, but always separate, always above and apart from the real business of living that happened on the main floors. Our parents fed that delusion, of course. They nurtured it with the precision of master gardeners tending to a prized rose. Every achievement of hers magnified, every minor setback soothed with reassurances of her inherent brilliance. Family dinners became showcases for her latest accomplishments, the promotion, the committee chairmanship, the perfectly manicured lawn of her suburban home. My parents would beam with practiced pride, passing dishes while passing judgment on those who chose differently. Did you hear about the Peterson boy? My mother would ask, her voice pitched to that specific frequency of concerned disapproval. Left his accounting job to backpack through Southeast Asia. His poor mother doesn't even know when he'll be back. And there it would be, the shared glance between my parents and sister, the silent communication. Thank goodness our family makes sensible choices. She was the responsible one, the one who stayed within the carefully drawn boundaries of acceptable ambition. The one who checked all the right boxes at all the right times, college, career, marriage, house in the right zip code. She measured her worth in square footage and retirement contributions, in neighborhood association approvals and holiday card photo shoots. I was the eccentric risk taker, the label applied not with admiration but with caution, like a warning sign. The starving artist who refused to settle into the mold shaped by family expectation. The one whose passion for creating beauty was treated like a regrettable habit I might someday outgrow. My successes were acknowledged with the faint praise of surprise. Oh, you actually sold a painting? How nice. As if they were happy accidents rather than the results of talent and persistence. When I walked away from it all 3 years ago, their disappointment hardened into myth. It wasn't a clean break. I tried at first to maintain some connection, to share news of exhibitions and reviews. Each attempt met with the same response, concerned questions about health insurance and retirement plans, gentle suggestions about teaching positions or commercial illustration work. The subtext always clear: when will you grow up and live in the real world? And my sister, always needing to be the tallest tree in the orchard, made sure the legend of my failure was passed along like scripture. This wasn't merely spite, it was existential necessity for her. My departure had created a vacuum in the family narrative, the cautionary tale slot suddenly empty. Without my visible struggle against which to measure her conformity, how could she be sure her sacrifices had been worthwhile? How could she justify the dullness in her eyes when she talked about her job, the careful calculation with which she planned vacations and social engagements? She crafted the narrative with the skill of a novelist, embellishing details with each retelling. What began as he struggling to establish himself in a competitive field evolved into increasingly dire scenarios. First, I was between apartments, technically true for the 3 weeks I spent in hotels while searching for my Berlin loft. Then I was couch surfing with artist friends, a creative interpretation of my residency at an exclusive arts collective in Barcelona. By the 3rd year, according to cousins who still occasionally texted me, I had been transformed into a cautionary fable, a modern tragedy. She told them I was homeless, that I slept in alleys between murals, that I burned every bridge in pursuit of dreams that wouldn't pay rent, let alone feed a future. She described imaginary encounters with mutual acquaintances who had supposedly spotted me, disheveled and thin, sketching tourists at a Paris cafe for loose change. She spoke of me with the performative concern of someone discussing a terminal illness, hushed tones, sad head shakes, occasional sighs that conveyed both pity and the unspoken relief of someone who had dodged a similar fate. And the family, bless them, fed on her words like pigeons around stale bread, eager and unquestioning. Not a single one thought to verify her claims. Not an uncle, not a cousin, not even my parents bothered to reach out directly to ask if I was actually destitute. It was easier, I suppose, to accept the story that validated their own life choices. If pursuing art had left me homeless, then their safe careers and modest ambitions were vindicated. If passion led to poverty, then perhaps passion was best kept as a weekend hobby, safely contained like a dangerous pet. They imagined me wrapped in tattered coats, shivering in subway stations, sketching portraits for pocket change, while I was actually signing the lease on my Tribeca loft, negotiating with galleries in 3 countries, sipping espresso on my balcony overlooking the city I had conquered through sheer force of will and talent. The irony wasn't lost on me, how they pictured me sleeping on cardboard while I slept on Egyptian cotton, how they imagined me begging for meals while I dined at restaurants where reservations were made months in advance. Their pity became a sort of comfort to them, a salve for their own inertia. If I had failed, then their mediocrity was safe, excusable. Their unfulfilled dreams and abandoned passions could be tucked away without regret, protected by the cautionary tale of what happens when you dare too much, reach too far. At least we have stability, they could tell themselves as they clocked in at jobs that slowly drained their spirits. At least we made the responsible choice, they could think as they watched their creative impulses atrophy from disuse. So I let them believe it. At first, it was simply easier than correction. The distance I'd placed between us, physical, emotional, philosophical, made intervention seem unnecessary. What did it matter what they thought of me when I was building a life they couldn't even comprehend? But as time passed, I recognized a certain power in their misconception, a freedom in being underestimated. If they believed me destitute, they wouldn't come asking for favors, wouldn't try to leverage connection for gain. The presumption of my failure became a shield against intrusion, a barrier protecting the new life I was cultivating. I watched from afar as their assumptions hardened into certainty, monitored through the occasional text from the few relatives still in sporadic contact. As my career progressed, from my initial breakthrough in Berlin, to the Arts Collective residency in Barcelona, and finally to my current base in New York with a Tribeca loft, birthdays and holidays brought perfunctory messages from family. Thinking of you, hope things are better soon that revealed how thoroughly my sister's fiction had been absorbed into family consciousness. Christmas cards addressed to my old studio arrived with gift cards to chain restaurants and retail stores, practical assistance for my imagined poverty. I donated them all to a local shelter, amused at how charity intended for me would actually help those genuinely in need. Not once did I offer correction. Not when my first major solo show received coverage in international art publications, not when a critic compared my technique to masters I had studied obsessively, not when collectors began requesting commissions months in advance. Success, I discovered, tastes sweeter when savored in private. There's a certain pleasure in achievement unacknowledged by those who doubted you, pure and untainted by their reluctant approval. I had learned that silence, when wielded right, could be sharper than truth, more devastating than any rebuttal. Absence becomes presence when prolonged enough, a negative space that defines everything around it. My refusal to engage, to correct, to defend became a statement more powerful than any evidence I could have presented. I stayed off social media entirely, creating profiles under my studio name only, detached from personal identity. I disappeared from the circles they haunted, those digital gathering spaces where lives are curated and displayed for validation. I ignored every family function with the cold precision of a scalpel slicing away rot, birthdays, holidays, anniversaries, all marked on my calendar only to be deliberately missed. For 3 years, I let the rumors fester, let my sister bask in the artificial light she built from tearing down my shadow. It would have been easy to dispel the myths, a single social media post showing my studio, a forwarded article about an exhibition, even a casual mention of my address in the heart of one of the world's most expensive cities. But easy wasn't the point. Vindication in installments would have diluted the eventual reckoning. And I knew, with the patience of an artist who understands that some pigments require time to fully develop their depth, that a reckoning was coming. She needed it, desperately. This fiction she'd created about my downfall had become essential to her identity, a cornerstone of her self-perception as the successful sibling, the one who had chosen wisely while I had chosen ruin. The longer my silence stretched, the more elaborate her tales became, as if my absence had created a canvas onto which she could project her darkest fears about the road not taken. In manufacturing my failure, she was really expressing her terror of what might have happened had she ever taken a similar risk, ever stepped off the prescribed path that felt increasingly like a prison. But time has a way of unraveling the threadbare tapestry of lies, of exposing the shoddy craftsmanship of fabrications built without the foundation of truth. Time demands evidence, and eventually, the absence of confirmation becomes its own kind of refutation. 3 years without a single verified sighting of me panhandling or sleeping rough, 3 years without even a distant acquaintance who could corroborate her stories, such a vacuum begins to create doubt, even among the most credulous audiences. So when the reunion invitation arrived, I knew the moment had come. It appeared in my mailbox in Berlin, having been forwarded through 2 previous addresses, the envelope slightly worn from its journey. Faux handwritten, all performative warmth and shallow nostalgia, the cursive font mass-produced to mimic genuine connection. Family reunion, it proclaimed in embossed silver letters against cream cardstock. Reconnect, remember, rejoice. Below, in my sister's actual handwriting, hope you can make it this time. Everyone misses you. A lie, of course. They miss the idea of me, the cautionary tale, the topic of concerned conversation over dessert. They miss the comfort my absence provided, the reassurance of their own choices that my supposed failure reinforced. But they didn't miss me, the actual person, the artist, the one who had chosen differently and thrived. I saw it for what it was, a stage, another theater, another crowd gathered to perform the rituals of family without the substance of genuine connection. But this time, I wasn't coming as the forgotten, the overlooked, the subject of pitying whispers. This time, I wasn't arriving under anyone else's script, relegated to a minor role in a production I hadn't helped write. This time, I would be both playwright and lead actor, director and star. No phone calls, no polite RSVP, just a silent promise to deliver spectacle, the kind they'd never see coming, the kind that would rewrite their comfortable narrative in a single decisive stroke. I made the arrangements with meticulous attention to detail, flights booked, accommodations secured at the city's most exclusive hotel rather than staying with family as expected, and most importantly, the car, that magnificent machine that would announce my arrival like a monarch's fanfare. The black Rolls Royce Phantom rolled over the gravel driveway like a panther stalking a prey that didn't even know it was about to be devoured. I had chosen the timing precisely, late afternoon, when the gathering would be in full swing, when conversations would have settled into comfortable patterns, when drinks would have loosened tongues and lowered guards. The day itself cooperated beautifully, clear skies and golden sunshine creating the perfect backdrop for the drama about to unfold. The car moved with deliberate slowness, each pebble beneath its tires announcing my approach with small, percussive pops that gradually drew attention. The engine didn't roar. It didn't need to assert its presence through volume. It purred, low and dignified, announcing power without the need for vulgarity. This was old money sound, inherited confidence sound, the acoustic signature of success so secure it no longer needed to advertise itself. Sunlight slid off its obsidian curves like liquid gold, a river of light dancing across chrome trim and tinted glass. I watched through those windows as heads began to turn, as the outdoor gathering registered the intrusion of unexpected luxury. The reunion was being held at my uncle's estate, a property impressive by suburban standards but suddenly diminished by the vehicle now commanding attention on its driveway. The contrast was exactly as I had intended, this symbol of my success appearing in the very space where my failure had been so elaborately constructed. The personalized license plate, not gone, glimmered like a punchline delivered too late to take back, a direct refutation of the narrative they had all accepted. I had spent hours considering this detail, weighing options that ranged from subtly triumphant to openly antagonistic. In the end, I chose the message that spoke directly to the heart of my sister's fiction. I had not disappeared, not failed, not been destroyed by my choices. I had simply been elsewhere, flourishing beyond a limited imagination. They heard the engine before they saw me fully, the distinctive mechanical whisper cutting through the ambient noise of the gathering. Heads turned like sunflowers to sunlight, a synchronized movement that rippled through the crowd. Conversation stuttered, drinks paused mid-sip, laughter curdled into uncertainty. I sat motionless behind the wheel for several calculated seconds, allowing anticipation to build, letting the question of who might emerge from such a vehicle hang in the air unanswered. I saw the twitch of recognition before my hand even touched the door. When I finally stepped out, the air shifted, as if the world itself exhaled. They heard the engine before they saw me fully, the distinctive mechanical whisper cutting through the ambient noise of the gathering. Heads turned like sunflowers to sunlight, a synchronized movement that rippled through the crowd. Conversation stuttered, drinks paused mid-sip, laughter curdled into uncertainty. I sat motionless behind the wheel for several calculated seconds, allowing anticipation to build, letting the question of who might emerge from such a vehicle hang in the air unanswered. The suit was midnight blue, double-breasted, custom. Tailored to an inch of vanity, the silk lining a secret whisper only I knew. Not black, that would have been too severe, too obviously making a statement. Navy held authority without aggression, projected confidence without trying too hard. The fabric was English, the cut Italian, the overall effect unmistakably that of someone to whom quality was not an occasional indulgence but a baseline expectation. I didn't just walk, I moved like I belonged there because I did, not because they allowed it, but because I'd carved out that space with blood, time, and rejection. Every gallery that initially turned me away, every critic who dismissed my early work, every moment of doubt that had kept me awake in those first lean years, all had been transformed into the unshakable certainty with which I now moved through the world. Success, real success, changes your body's language, rewrites the very rhythm of your breath. You no longer seek permission to take up space. The silence was thunderous as I approached the main gathering, a physical pressure against my skin. I could read their thoughts in their frozen expressions, the mental gymnastics as they tried to reconcile the person they saw with the homeless failure they had been told to expect. The cognitive dissonance manifested physically, jaws slackened, eyes widened, bodies tensed as if preparing for some sort of attack. My cousin Danielle, who once scolded me for wasting my potential during a particularly contentious Thanksgiving dinner, now gawked like she'd seen a ghost wrapped in a paycheck. Her transformation was the most dramatic, face flushing, then paling, then settling into an uncomfortable grimace that tried and failed to approximate a welcoming smile. She had been one of my sister's most eager audiences, always hungry for updates on my supposed downfall, always quick to compare my imagined struggle with her children's conventional achievements. Uncle Reginald, who had patronizingly offered me an entry-level position at his insurance firm when I announced my plan to pursue art professionally, now stood paralyzed, his cigar hung half-lit from his lip, forgotten in the shock of my appearance. The ash grew long and precarious as he stared, no longer the magnanimous potential savior but a man confronting the limitations of his own vision. Even Aunt Melody, who prided herself on pretending nothing fazed her, whose entire personality was built around an affected world weariness, lowered her designer sunglasses to make sure her eyes weren't lying. She had always been the family's self-appointed arbiter of taste, evaluating everyone's clothing, homes, and life choices against some invisible standard that seemed to shift whenever anyone came close to meeting it. Now, she sat frozen, the calculated nonchalance she had perfected over decades suddenly inadequate for this unanticipated development. But the real masterpiece, the true culmination of my carefully orchestrated return, was my sister. She stood at the edge of the lawn, separated slightly from the main group as if she had been moving to greet the unexpected arrival when recognition stopped her mid-stride. Her posture told the entire story, shoulders that had been relaxed in her role as co-host now rigid with tension, spine straightened as if preparing for physical confrontation, red solo cup clenched in her right hand like a lifeline, the plastic crumpling slightly in her grip. Her jaw was set tight enough to crack molars, the tension visible in the small muscle that twitched along its edge. Her smile was a twitch, a ghost of arrogance long abandoned, a reflexive social mask that no longer fit the situation it was trying to cover. It reminded me of watching poorly maintained neon signs, flickering, uncertain, threatening to go dark at any moment. Her free hand moved unconsciously to smooth her already immaculate hair, a gesture I recognized from childhood as a response to feeling threatened or outmatched. Our eyes locked across the gathering, the dozens of relatives between us suddenly irrelevant, background figures in a scene that was fundamentally about us, about the narrative she had created and the reality I had manifested in direct contradiction to it. And for a moment, all the years between us vanished, the hurts and betrayals and misunderstandings stripped away. We were children again, caught in one of our countless standoffs, neither willing to be the first to break. No words needed to be exchanged in that electric instant of recognition. I saw everything I needed to see written plainly on her face. The disbelief came first, the widening of pupils, the slight parting of lips, the momentary cessation of breath that accompanies the brain's rejection of unexpected input. Then came the scrambling calculations behind her eyes, visible in their rapid movement, the desperate search for a way to incorporate this new reality into the story she'd been telling for years. I didn't greet her. That would have been merciful. Instead, I walked past her, letting my presence fill the silence like spilled ink over their tidy scripts. People moved aside unconsciously, the way fish scatter before a shark's shadow. I didn't need a red carpet. The way they stared, the path cleared itself. Conversations restarted with faltering awkwardness. They spoke in stutters, half laughs, trying to pretend it was no big deal. That I was just back. But the truth stuck in their throats. I found a seat, not at the edge of the gathering like a wayward outcast, but right at the center. An empty place at a long table, directly across from my sister. I sat, uncaring who it was meant for. Forks paused mid-cut. My presence alone restructured their hierarchy like tectonic plates shifting under polite grass. She tried. She really did. Cleared her throat, offered some lukewarm joke about me cleaning up nice, but the words collapsed before they reached me. I didn't smile, I didn't nod. I simply looked at her, not with indifference, but with something worse, calm assessment, like an artist examining a previous work and finding it lacking in both technique and vision. As though she were a bad painting hung in the wrong gallery, ignored by the serious critics. Eventually, the questions came, quietly at first. Cousin Alondra leaned in with a cautious smile, asking what I'd been up to. I met her curiosity with a polite, measured answer. Descriptions vague enough to mystify, specific enough to terrify. International exhibits, private collectors, a gallery in Berlin, a loft in Tribeca. They nodded like they understood, but I could see the panic behind their eyes. My success was untranslatable in their language of mortgages, promotions, and neighborhood gossip. I was a foreign film in a room full of sitcom reruns, and my sister she said nothing. Ate nothing. Just sat there, face frozen, watching her version of reality fall apart under the weight of proof. The phantom gleamed behind me like a silent witness, and though I said little, it spoke volumes. Let them rewrite their stories. Let them fumble for new excuses. Fresh lies to keep their fragile egos intact. But me? I just leaned back in my chair, the quiet of that luxury beast still echoing through the bones of their make-believe. The sun dipped lower behind the sycamores as shadows began to stretch their arms across the lawn, cooling the edges of conversation and forcing laughter to lose its warmth. Paper lanterns swayed on threads of wind, flickering above the perfectly trimmed hedges like little watchful eyes. The family reunion had slipped into that delicate hour between daylight and dusk, where smiles grew thinner, masks heavier, and truths, no matter how carefully hidden, began to crawl from under the skin. And I was still there. I hadn't left after my entrance. I hadn't let the moment pass like some magician's final trick, pulling away in my phantom to leave them gasping. No, that would have been too kind. I stayed, settled in like a splinter no one could pull out, like a memory too inconvenient to forget. I mingled, slowly, deliberately. A ghost come home, not to haunt, but to reclaim the house built in my name without permission. Cousins circled like moths, some with apologies hidden behind compliments, others probing with cautious questions wrapped in false neutrality. So you really own that car? Asked one, her gold hoop earrings trembling as though they too were unsure how to hang on. Didn't you study art or something? Another ventured, like my medium somehow invalidated my presence. I let their questions float in the air unanswered just long enough for them to sweat before answering. Calm. Unbothered. No boasting. No gloating. That would imply I cared whether they believed me. I didn't. My success didn't require validation from a circle of people who'd written my obituary in whispers 3 years ago. My sister meanwhile had retreated to her usual role, the gracious host. The facade cracked around the edges now, but she kept performing. She poured tea like it was a sacred rite, laughed a little too hard at other people's jokes, and checked her phone with increasing frequency, as though expecting someone, anyone, to rescue her from the spectacle she could no longer control. Her husband, Marcus, clung to her arm like a question mark, her smile tight as upholstery, her eyes shifting from me to her like she was doing math and not liking the sum. Eventually, she cornered me. Had to. Pride doesn't just go quietly into the night, especially not when it's lived its whole life being the center of every room. You could have given a heads up, she said, leaning in, her voice pitched just low enough for privacy but still crisp with tension. I mean, damn. You nearly gave Aunt Melody a heart attack. I didn't look at her right away. I let my gaze drift over the crowd. The silver trays, the fake laughter, the familiarity that had once choked me like a wool blanket in summer. Then I met her eyes. Didn't think you'd have room for me in your version of events, I replied, the words sliding out smooth and cool, like ice in a crystal glass. She flinched, just a little, enough for me to see it. Come on, man. That stuff I said, it wasn't personal. No? I tilted my head. You told people I was living out of my car. She scratched the back of her neck, the confidence slipping. I didn't think you'd care. You were gone, off, chasing whatever art fairy tale you thought would work out. And yet, I said, letting the silence stretch like a blade. Here I am. She nodded. Glanced down at the ground as if trying to find a version of this moment where she still looked like the hero. Yeah. Here you are. In a damn Rolls Royce no less. It's not the car that bothers you, I said, voice low, steady. It's the fact that you can't explain it. You told everyone I failed. Now you're watching them rewrite the story in real time, and you're not the narrator anymore. Her face hardened, the mask of diplomacy giving way to something raw. You think you're better than us now? No, I said, deadpan. I knew I was before. The difference is, now you know it too. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Because deep down, behind all the envy, behind the performative stability and suburban gloss she'd weaponized for years, she knew I'd done something she hadn't, walked away from approval, and made it without asking for permission. I turned before she could manufacture a retort, and walked across the lawn toward the makeshift bar. A breeze curled around the glass lanterns, whispering through the hedges like it too had something to say. I leaned against the wood-paneled bar and ordered a sparkling water with lime. The bartender, some local kid they probably hired for the day, poured without asking for credentials, his eyes darting between me and the phantom, like he was watching a scene from a movie unfolding live. As I sipped, I noticed a few of the younger cousins inching toward me. Not the ones who'd grown fat off the family's traditions and comfort zones, but the ones with restlessness in their bones. The ones who remembered how I used to sneak them sketchbooks at Christmas, or how I disappeared like a myth they weren't sure had ever been real. One of them, Eli, maybe 17 or 18 now, stood beside me, quiet, watching the glass in my hand like it held secrets. Eventually, he spoke. They said you were crazy, he muttered, his voice a little hoarse, that you left because you couldn't handle responsibility. I didn't answer right away, just watched the sun bleeding into the horizon like oil into canvas. Then I turned to him. Responsibility's not about sticking around to keep people comfortable, I said. Sometimes it means burning the script they gave you and writing your own, even if no one claps at the end. He nodded slowly, then looked down at his shoes. I want to be a writer. Then write, I said, finishing my sparkling water and placing the glass down. With finality. But don't ask for their permission. They'll never give it. As the sky darkened, and the garden lights flickered on like stage cues, the reunion shifted. I could feel it in the air, like a current had changed. Some of the old guard still clung to their myths, but others, they were starting to see. The story wasn't what they'd been told. The protagonist hadn't vanished. He'd just left the theater and built a better one. And this wasn't the climax. It was only the opening act. The moon had risen like a pale witness, soft and high above the twisted limbs of the trees, casting a silver glaze over the well-kept lawn. The laughter was thinning now, brittle and sparse, like a party that knew the music had already stopped, but kept dancing anyway. A few of the older uncles were gathered around the grill, gesturing with bravado and beer in hand, retelling stories that had been passed down so many times they'd become more fiction than memory. The younger cousins lingered near the bar or beneath the string lights, stealing glances at me as if I were still an apparition, as if the moment hadn't entirely solidified into reality. The Rolls sat silent behind me, gleaming under the garden lights. Not so much a car as a punctuation mark. It hadn't moved since it arrived. It didn't need to. Its presence said more than a horn ever could. I stood alone at the edge of the patio. My second glass of water untouched, sweating against my palm. My sister was across the yard, hunched in conversation with our father now, voices too quiet to carry. But their postures told the story. Shoulders drawn, arms folded, heads bent in angles that screamed tension without needing sound. And for the first time in years, I saw our father not as a monolith, but as a man watching a narrative he'd long endorsed, begin to dissolve in his hands. And I knew then, this was no longer about revenge, no. That had been the entrance, the spectacle, the moment I let them all choke on their own assumptions. But this was about something else. I walked slowly through the gathering, my shoes clicking against the flagstone path with the rhythm of finality. A few people tried to catch my eye. Danielle with her awkward smile and oversized mocktail glass. Aunt Melody, tapping her nails against her phone as though trying to pretend none of this had shaken her composure. I offered them nothing. No acknowledgement, no courtesy, just the gravity of my stride, cutting through their comfort like a scalpel through silk. I stopped at the center of the yard, near the fire pit, where a few chairs sat empty, the flames low, flickering like the dying embers of a story told too many times. And then, I did the one thing they never expected. I spoke. My name, I said, clear and loud enough for every corner of the garden to hear, is not a cautionary tale. A few heads turned sharply. Conversations died on the vine. I am not the dropout. I am not the lost child. I am not the failure you whispered about for the last 3 years. My voice didn't rise, but it carried, controlled, precise, like a blade drawn slowly from its sheath. I didn't disappear. I escaped. I outgrew a version of myself that was written by people too scared to rewrite their own lives. Now all eyes were on me. Even my sister had stopped, her arms limp at her sides, her face blank with something between disbelief and dread. I left because I wanted more. Not money, not cars, freedom. And I earned it. Every inch, every dollar, every damn second of peace I now carry with me. I stepped closer to the fire pit, watching the light flicker across their faces. Familiar, aging, fragile. You told yourselves I was homeless because the truth, that I was happy without you, was too dangerous to admit. You thought if you painted me as broken, your walls wouldn't look so gray. A hush fell heavy, thick enough to press into lungs. No one moved. But you were wrong, I said. I am not broken. I am the result of what happens when you stop begging to be accepted by people who only know how to love you in pieces. And then, I turned to my sister. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She looked smaller now, the weight of the evening finally folding her in half from the inside out. You tried to erase me, I said. Quiet now. Just between us. But I became something too real to be denied. So this is me giving you back your story. Keep it. Mold it. Burn it. I don't care. I walked away without waiting for a response. There was nothing left for her to say. The truth had already settled over the garden like dew, cold and undeniable. I approached my father who hadn't moved. He looked at me like he was trying to decipher something far too complex for words. Why didn't you call? He asked finally, his voice worn with the weight of 1,000 unasked questions. I paused, stared him dead in the eye, because I didn't want to explain success to people who only recognized it when it wore a suit they could afford. He nodded, just once. No apology, no excuse. And I didn't expect one. I left then. Not in anger, not in victory, but in release. The doors of the Rolls clicked shut with a soft finality, the leather interior greeting me like an old friend. I started the engine, the soft returning. Familiar and comforting. I eased the car down the driveway, past the hedges, past the paper lanterns and string lights and clinking glasses. I didn't look in the rearview mirror, because that chapter was closed. The reunion would go on, of course. They would talk. They would twist the story again, try to make sense of the rewrite, but none of it mattered anymore. The page had turned, and this time, I was holding the pen. As the tires kissed the asphalt and the house vanished behind me, I finally allowed myself to peacefully exhale.